Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, and good morning to everyone here and to those who are online. We have a very special sister with us this morning, Sister Jude Pemell. She spent years in Los Angeles in the theater industry. While in California, she came to Baba in 1984. In the 1990s, she became a Forsnick psychotherapist. She returned to Australia and worked in the justice system for 14 years. She is now in private practice. Sister Jude has specialized in addictions, complex trauma, family and group therapy. She lives in Sydney. She is a much loved member of the BK family in Australia. She has a sharp and clear intellect and is a wonderful presenter. So we welcome Sister Jude.
Thank you, Vijay. And good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you here. Can I just ask any of you who are online, if you're able to come down to the front, please do. Yeah, if you're able to move down, please move down. Thank you. The reason I'm asking is because I'm not really into giving classes and workshops. I really love to open a conversation. I love what I do to be interactive and relevant for you. And this is a very difficult space because it's quite hard to connect with you when you're up here. And I want to kind of reach out and connect with you. And so, first of all, welcome to this session. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of background to this conversation I'm about to open on healing addictions. Because when I came to Baba it was about this time of year in 1984, I was working, I had a 20-year career in theatre, film and television. 10 of those years was in England. I had a couple of years in Australia, and I had 10 years then in Los Angeles, working mostly in film and television. And I was at that time in my life a deeply cynical, very hard-nosed atheist. And I was the most unlikely suspect for someone to get drawn onto the spiritual path. And it really wasn't a human being who brought me into Gyan, it was Baba. And I had simply gone to the centre one day. I knew nothing of the Brahma Kumaris or Raj Yoga. But a fellow Australian by the name of Brian Bacon was in Los Angeles. He was actually a friend of my mum's. And he had called me and I'd arranged to take him out to lunch. And I went to the Raj Yoga Centre to pick him up. And they invited me in, and at some point they were having traffic control. And they said, oh, we're just going to have a little meditation. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to join you. I just sat there, and instantly I was pulled out of my body. And I had this incredible experience. And so when, the meditation finished, I was sort of, wow. And I remember saying to them, we'd had some herbal tea. I said, what did you put in that tea? And I asked them if I could have the music, because I thought the music had given me the experience. And I took the music home, put the music on, and I had the same experience at home. And I thought, wow, I just wanted to meditate. Instantly, I would sit from then on, I would sit for hours every day having this, fantastic experience. And I came to Baba with a whole lot of addictions myself. I worked, in the entertainment industry. Frankly, we all drank far too much. It was a drinking culture. It was a drug-taking culture. I did not do drugs, thank God. I wasn't interested. But I came with plenty of other addictions as well, which had nothing to do with substances. And, I know that the Brahmins sort of thought, and they told me, they thought Baba was insane if he thought he could make me pure. And but the remarkable thing was that I sat in so much silence at home. I didn't want the BKs to give me any knowledge. I had contact with them. I was very drawn to them because they were such lovely people. I had never met anybody like them. And I could see instantly how pure and how such beautiful souls. And there were very few. This is back in early 84. There was only a handful in Los Angeles. But they were so beautiful, and I was very drawn. And I had 4 very beautiful spiritual mothers, Sister Denise, Sister Ellen, Diane Tillman, and another sister, Joan, who was in LA. And I very quickly realised that this incredible attraction I had to this meditation that really nobody had taught me, it was just direct with Baba, that these kind of substance addictions I had were making me feel as though I was trying to run with my ankles tied together. And so I experienced a desire to stop, because I knew I could have a better experience from the meditation, although what was happening to me was wonderful. I knew I could have a better experience. And so I was married at that time, and I wasn't too impressed with celibacy, to be perfectly honest. But I thought, if I can't be celibate, the rest of it is a waste of time. And I just had the thought one day, I'm just going to be celibate for a month. And at the end of that month, I remember sitting in meditation. I didn't really know who Baba was, to be perfectly honest. The BKs talked about Baba. I wasn't too impressed because I didn't believe in God. But I thought, well, it's 30 days, I'll sit here. And the revelation that was given to me in that meditation early that morning was extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. And I just had the realisation, wow, this is the best way of rebelling against society that I've ever encountered. So it immediately took on great appeal. And so I became celibate. And then I just stopped drinking when I didn't honestly think I could just stop. I'm being very, very honest with you. And then 4 years later, I had struggled with smoking cigarettes tremendously. It took me about 4.5 years, about 4 years in Gyan, almost 4 years. And I was quite desperate because I felt terrible that I was still smoking. I was ashamed. I had so much guilt and shame around it. And I got introduced to the 12-step program, Smokers Anonymous. And it was life-changing, completely life-changing. I went to that program. I attended about 4 meetings a week. And from the very first meeting, I never had another cigarette. And those meetings were so dynamic for me that I got right into it. And 9 months later, I had a very close relationship with Sister Genti from the word go. From before I was a Brahmin, I met her. And she spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, and so did the Duddies. So I got to know them pretty well also. But after 9 months, me working this 12-step program, Genti returned to Los Angeles to do some service, and she arrived early in the morning and immediately had to come and do a little program at the Raj Yoga Centre. And I hadn't seen her, for about 9 or 10 months, since just before I'd quit smoking. And she did her program. I had no real interaction with her apart from saying hello. And at the end of her program, she was asking for questions, and there weren't many questions. So I had some questions. And so we had a very slight interaction with her answering those questions, and maybe me asking another question. And the program finished, and she came straight to me. She said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "I have never seen anyone grow spiritually so fast as you. What is it? I have to know." And I was amazed. And I said to her, "Well, I quit smoking." And because she knew I smoked. And she knew it was a huge thing for me to stop. And I said, "And I'm working a 12-step program." And she said, "Oh, it's not that. It could only be Raj Yoga that gives you spiritual growth." And I said, "No." And I said, "It is the 12-step program because I have done so much work on myself." And it was that work I did in the 12-step program, which was very systematic work that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, in all the anonymous programs. And so when I came back to Australia, I'd had a good initial recovery, and then my time in Los Angeles was up. I'd actually felt the karma finish completely, and so I just wanted to get back to Australia. I hadn't lived in Australia for 20 years, and I honestly thought I would never want to go back. But I had this overwhelming desire to go home. And so when I got back to Sydney, I was really losing interest in working in show business. I had a tremendous amount of experience. I'd worked in the theatre in England for 10 years. I'd done some really big shows in Australia for a couple of years, and then I'd gone to Hollywood, and I'd done a heap of work there. So when I came back to Australia, I was in demand. I had all this wonderful overseas experience, and I found myself I turned down Miss Saigon and I turned down Phantom of the Opera. Huge shows that every Australian in my position wanted to do those shows, and I said no. And I got a job teaching at the National Institute of Dramatic Art. And while I was there was a Raj Yoga Centre quite close to NIDA. And I used to go over there, if I had a few hours off, I would go over there to meditate. And I found that while I was there, the Raj Yoga Centre was in a red light district, so there were drug dealers on the street, there were alcoholics on the street, there were prostitutes, both male and female. You know, it was a very colourful area, and I actually loved it. I thought it was a great place for a Raj Yoga Centre because, you know, Baba tells us to serve the prostitutes. And I taught while I was there. The doorbell would ring constantly when I was just sitting in meditation, and it'd be people just hanging out, addicts and trannies and, you know, this very colourful population. I'd answer the door and they'd be pretty off their face saying, "Can you help me?" And I wasn't sure what to do. And so I spoke to the guy who, you know, the coordinator of the centre, and I said, we have to help these people because we're here. We've got a shop front on Crown Street. We need to help these people. And he said, "You're right, Jude, you do it." So I said, "Okay, you'll give me all the backup support I need?" And he said, "Yes, we will." I said, "Because, you know, I will want to offer these people cups of tea." And he said, "It's fine. We'll have tolly, we'll have, you know, you can give them tea and coffee, blah, blah." So because of my own experience in that 12-step program, I was also married to a New York artist who had a cocaine issue and a bit of an alcohol issue. And I had to deal with that. I mean, he was really very in a serious way. And he eventually came into recovery and totally transformed in his 12-step programs. Total transformation. It was utterly miraculous. So I had this really deep spiritual understanding of addiction. And so in future, when the doorbell rang, I said, "Look, just come back when you're a little bit straighter and I'll teach you to meditate." And so I did. And I had hundreds of them coming. Hundreds of them. And we were having these unbelievable experiences that Baba was giving us. All of us. And I realised that they were all natural meditators like me, because we were also used to altering our consciousness. They were so easy to teach. And I would listen to their stories. You know, it was a completely non-judgmental space. And they would tell me their stories and I would listen to them. And they became my teachers. They were instrumental for me in the most important way, because what was happening to me is that they were opening my heart, and I experienced levels of empathy and compassion I had never believed possible. My heart was open. I loved them unconditionally, and I felt Baba loving them through me. I really had that experience. And sometimes when we were meditating, I might have a little judgmental thought, because some of them were very unwashed and their feet were filthy and they smelt. And I was having, you know, a bit of a judgmental thought one evening, and I felt Baba actually come into my body, and I felt him put these arms around the whole room, and it was like through my arms, and lift them all into his heart. And I felt this incredible unconditional love that Baba was giving them. And it just totally cured me of that judgment, that critic in me, because I felt Baba's incredible mercy for everybody. And I was so deeply moved. And I also knew that this was the service I was cut out for and that I was meant to be doing. And I would go to NIDA, and I'm dealing with all these, young actors and technical production people that I was teaching. I was enjoying what I was doing, but they had such incredible egos. And I just wanted to be with the addicts because they were so profoundly honest and just exposed themselves. And we had this very deeply intimate encounter. And I just loved it. And pretty soon I changed career. I started to study psychology, psychotherapy, and I studied the whole addiction stuff formally. And I had a change in career. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Because who was getting all the benefit from this? Me. They were my teachers. I had all these wonderful teachers. And I loved them and they loved me. It was an absolutely spellbinding experience. And so that was my service field for a very long time, that I was doing that service. And I started a program called Step 11, and I had all these wonderful people coming to the centre. And the brothers left the centre and the sisters moved in. Dr. Nirmala wanted sisters running the centres at that time, and then the sisters didn't like me being at the centre with all these addicts, so I got kicked out. And I went to a detox and a rehab around the corner from the Raj Yoga Centre and carried on there. And it was while I was there that the Australian Broadcasting Corporation did a program on me, and then the Sydney Morning Herald did a program on me, and it was like Dr. Nirmala said, I think you better come back to the centre. And because their phone was ringing at the headquarters in Sydney, was ringing all this publicity, their phones were running hot, saying, how can I come and meet Jude Pemell? It was all these psychologists from all around Australia who'd seen me on national television or whatever. And so I thought, Baba operates in very entertaining ways. And sometimes, you can feel very abandoned. I could feel very abandoned by the organisation under those circumstances. But it's like Baba, he makes it all happen. And I developed so much faith in Baba and in the drama. It was a huge personal journey for me. And so from then on, I had a new career and I had a new life. And I talked to Sister Genti when I was changing career because I was quite scared, I was not a youngster anymore. And she said to me, go with it, because what's happening, she said, if you've lost interest, I felt those sanskars for showbiz had closed, shut down, and I couldn't do it anymore. She said, I've never heard anyone have this experience. But she said, if that's what you're experiencing, then it means that you can't grow spiritually in show business, and this new field is offering you all this spiritual growth. And I said, well, it is. And I'm hungry for it. She said, go for it. And, Genti is very intuitive. She has a very deeply intuitive understanding of these things. And she's given me some wonderful feedback at turning points in my life, which I've really valued. So, hence, I felt that, I came to the field of addictions when I started to study the psychology and all this, I thought psychology and spirituality belong together. They should never be separated. In Brahman life, we need to understand the psychology of what we're doing, because was always for me the missing link in Raj Yoga. And so working in the addiction field was so rewarding because I got the other side. And I could really understand what Baba was doing with us and with me. And so I bring you this presentation from a great deal of experience. And I just need to be able to get to the computer here. So this is what addiction is like. It's like trying to walk into a massively strong headwind in life. Because when you have addictions or codependencies, it can feel like the entire world is against you. And the more powerful the addiction, the more that feeling can grow. And so let me clarify what addiction is. In 1984, the year I came in Gyan, the World Health Organization made an international statement to all the governments of the world, and it said, addiction is the crisis of our time. It is the crisis of our time, because at that time, every country in the world was struggling with runaway, unmanageable addiction. And within a few years, the whole world was struggling with another unmanageable epidemic called HIV/AIDS. It started in Africa, and then it absolutely blossomed in America. And so the interest of governments in addiction was huge. And it was at that time in the 80s in America that we had this tidal wave, this absolute tsunami of interest from the 12-step program. The 12-step programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and then all of these other 12-step programs, Emotions Anonymous, Codependence Anonymous, they just started to blossom and grow all around America. And so America started to develop this massive interest in addiction. Everyone started going to 12-step programs. And a guy called John Bradshaw started to do a national television program on public broadcasting, and it was called Addiction in the Family. And, it's like when they show the Ramayana in India. There was nobody on the streets, they were all at home on a Wednesday night watching John Bradshaw's Addiction in the Family. It was revelatory in America. And what he did was link family dynamics with alcoholism and other addictions. And so we understand that what is going on in addiction is that the person who has an addiction is not a bad person at all. There's somebody who wants to feel normal. And for somebody who's never experienced what feeling normal is, because of what was going on in their childhood, they had a very high set level of anxiety because there was domestic violence. There was some kind of dysfunction in the family. There was maybe alcoholism, maybe violence, maybe some abusive thing, or something else. Maybe a parent was having affairs. Could be anything. And, kids need a very safe, stable, predictable, loving environment to grow up in, with nurturing, responsive, loving, warm caregivers, whether that is their parents or somebody else. That's what kids need. They need love, warmth, responsiveness, stability and predictability and safety and protection and nurturing. And if we all have these basic fundamental, they're our basic human needs as a kid and as an infant. And if those needs aren't met for us before the age of 2, we're going to have a very difficult life. It's happening very much because most of our brain development happens before the age of 2. And then from 2 till 5 is a very rapid brain development. And so our cognitive thinking facilities, our ability to reason and stuff, comes online by the age of 4.5, 5, which is why most kids, we don't start schooling until the age of about 4.5, 5, when we can absorb and learn. And, but play is very important before then because it helps our brain develop. And so because there's such important brain development happening early in life, our fundamental social situation is very important at that time, because the addictions and codependencies and compulsions of the adult are the unmet needs of the child. And so they develop as we grow because of those unmet needs of that youngster. And if my mum or my primary caregiver isn't responsive to me when I'm a baby, I don't understand that my parent isn't fulfilling my fundamental infancy need. I don't have the knowledge, to ask for a meeting with my parents and say, look guys, you're not cutting it. You need to be doing this with me. I have no understanding of that. But what happens inside me is that a spiritual void forms around that unmet need. And this is very significant. And that voidedness, that feeling of voidedness, it's like I've got all this emptiness inside that I don't understand. And I fill that void with anxiety. It will fill with anxiety because of the tension that forms around that unmet need that I don't actually understand, because I don't have language. I don't have the language to make sense of it. But as I grow up, all those unmet needs I experience as deficiencies in me, in myself. And there's shame around that. When I feel deficient, there is shame. And I don't want other people or the world to see that feeling of deficiency in me. And just having that feeling of deficiency sets up this pattern of anxiety. And at some point, as I grow up, I may pick up somebody's cigarette and have a smoke of it, have a drag of it. And despite the fact that it makes my head spin, and at one level makes me feel sick, it will also at another level make me feel good. And then at another point, sometimes, I'll get to have a drink of alcohol and it will make me feel good and I will want more of it. And this is the process of addiction, that the person who wants more is the person who feels normal after they have a little bit of a substance, or they have a little bit of chocolate or sugar or food. People, young kids, will turn to food when they lack love, when they lack the appropriate attention from their caregivers. So it begins very early in life. And this is why eating disorders are so incredibly difficult to treat. In my business, I work with eating disorders, and I know the pain. There's more shame around an eating disorder than there is around a sexual addiction. And yet all addictions start from the same place, those voids inside. All addictions begin and end with spiritual bankruptcy. And so we call that void inside spiritual bankruptcy. And the desire is to fill it as I get old enough. I want to fill it with physical fillers, with something outside myself. And this is why addiction is a spiritual issue. It begins and ends with spiritual bankruptcy. And codependency goes hand in hand with addiction. And for everyone who has an addiction, there will be at least 8 people around that person who is really deeply affected by the addiction in the addict. Parents, siblings, colleagues, friends. There can be a lot more than 8. And people who live with or who are in very close relationship to an addict, an alcoholic or otherwise addicted person will be very affected by the addiction, and they don't know it, because we can see what the alcohol or the food or the gambling or the whatever it is, the overwork and so on, is doing to the addict. But I can't see what it's doing to me. I have this blind spot. I want to help the addict. I want to give them lots of advice. I want to support them because I love them, or because I work with them, or they're my friend, or my child, or my parent, or my sibling. But I can't see how their addiction is making me sick. And so the codependent, the person around the addict, becomes very sick. It's a secondary effect of addiction. And so Americans began to realise that they were a nation of codependents and addicts. And there was a whole plethora of books being written about all of this. And there's recently a book being written called Dopamine Nation, and I want to just sort of explain to you how addiction works, because it's just understanding how it works enables me to break free. There are many subtle, very legal addictions, and we can be very vulnerable to these addictions in our spiritual lives. We may get addicted to wanting to be important, to wanting status in the Brahmin family, to wanting to achieve spiritually in an external way, or to want recognition from the Brahmin family, or to want something very badly in our spiritual life. The two pillars of addiction we call denial and rationalisation. And so there's this sort of secondary disease called denialism. And so this, what you're looking at the moment, at the screen, is what we call the addiction cycle. And so it has no beginning and end because it's a cyclic process. Sorry? You lost me? Oh, good. Very good. So let's look at the obsession. Now, most people think addiction is a problematic thought process. And so in the obsessional phase of addiction, I'm going to set myself up. I'm going to think, oh, I had this terrible childhood. I had an argument with my boss today. My family don't understand me. The Brahmin family don't understand me. Whatever. And so I'll just go and eat a couple of blocks of chocolate, or, go and exercise like mad for 4 hours, or, go and binge on movies on Netflix. There are lots of legal addictions I can really get into, or I'll do service. A friend of mine in Australia, she didn't have any illegal or apparent addictions, but she had a position within the Brahmin family. And she would come and tell me, I work so hard for the Brahma Kumaris, I work all night, I never sleep. And I said to her, when do you meditate? She said, and she didn't answer me, she just got really upset with me. I said, we need to sleep, we need to meditate. Or where's our service coming from? And so she kind of stayed away from me for a while. And after some years of this, she developed a utterly crippling illness, which has gotten worse and worse and worse. And it's now a one-way street for her. So, and I watched that soul just dig herself in deeper and deeper because she wanted all this appreciation and she wanted to be so important. And, this is what can happen when I have such a deep need for approval and acknowledgement and recognition. And so there's excuses, there's denial and rationalisations. I use all this negative self-talk, like I really deserve, I really deserve a drink, I really deserve, this, whatever it is, this feel-good. It's about a feel-good. And, I can compare myself with others, say, oh, they're much worse than me, The guy next door to me, he drinks far more than I do, whatever. I set myself up and then I'm over into the next phase, which is the compulsion or the action phase. And that's a loss of control. And of course, what comes with that loss of control is consequences. And with an addiction, nobody likes the consequences. The consequences are horrible and they get worse. I can lose friends. I can lose people stop trusting me. I can lose my family. I can lose, if I've got a really bad substance or gambling addiction or whatever, I can lose my house. I can lose my kids, I can lose my partner, I can lose everything that matters to me, quite frankly. And, you know, for people into substance addictions, it can be overdose, it can be death. And that will again take me back into the spiritual and emotional bankruptcy phase of the addiction cycle. So every time I go around this cycle, this becomes more pronounced. The shame, the self-deprecation, the rage, loneliness, depression, the self-hatred, torment, isolation. Addiction is very isolating because the addiction talks to me. It loves to isolate me from other people because then I'm totally under the control of the addiction. And, you know, Baba will say to us, I'm a Brahmin, I don't think I've got any addictions. You know, I'm travelling along and I get an attack of Maya. Baba calls it Maya. Maya is a very good word because it's the illusion of the vices that will attack me. It's that illusion and that feeling that even mentally I can go into some fantasies about something. And, you know, I can have addictions at that level of fantasy because I want to get that feeling of gratification. And this is massive in society. And so every time I go around this cycle, I become more and more spiritually bankrupt. Please, you know, if you want to ask me a question, feel free at any point, or I'll take questions afterwards. And so this is the cycle that's very difficult to break free of because of the cyclic nature of this process. And because it's this cycle is driven completely by feelings. We are emotionally driven beings. We are not thought driven. I know it's very common in the Brahmin family to hear that, you know, our thoughts are the drivers of Maya and of our behaviour, but that is not true. And neuroscientifically, it is proven that our first response to everything is a feeling. The neuroscience is in, because the neuroscience has now scanned people's brains in real time, thousands of people, and we see that where the soul actually sits is not in the pituitary gland, it's in the limbic brain, and the limbic brain governs our feelings and emotions. So our first response to everything is a feeling. And then we get a thought that enables us to make sense of that feeling. And because I've worked with addicts so much, I've always known, those of us, before the neuroscience came out on this, we knew that we are emotionally driven beings, because addiction is totally emotionally driven. You know, if I could have just have a thought that this is not good for me, then, you know, I could not be addicted. I could resolve that addiction problem immediately, but you can't cognitively resolve an addiction. We have to change our feelings. Which brings me to the window of tolerance. And so the window of tolerance is the zone where intense emotional arousal can be processed in a healthy way, allowing us to function and react to stress or anxiety effectively. Now, we all have our own window of tolerance. It's very personal and it's very subjective. Now, in an addict, in someone who's got addictions, what we call the window of tolerance can be very small. And so I can go into hyperarousal or hypoarousal very easily. And people who have experienced trauma as a child or even as an adult, it will shrink the window of tolerance. And so we look at the, fight or flight. When something happens, when our danger signals, when our alarm bells are going off and my brain is telling me I'm in danger, I will automatically go into a default position of wanting to flee, run away, or turn around and fight. My brain will give me the chemistry, the adrenaline and so on, to run or turn around and fight, whatever the danger is. And that's hyperarousal. The other thing that can happen is that I can go into a freeze response, which is the hypoarousal. And it's like I implode. My energy completely implodes. And I have no energy. I can't move. I'm like a little bunny rabbit in the headlights. I can't move. And I can't breathe. I actually will stop breathing. There are times in my work where I have to say to my client, breathe, 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 because they go into such hypoarousal. Because I work with complex trauma and I work a lot with people who will stop breathing. And we call it dysregulation. And this occurs when we deviate from that smooth sailing in our window of tolerance. Within our own individual window of tolerance, there's this, we can go a bit up, up and down before we go out, hyper-aroused out through the top of our window, or hypo-aroused down underneath our window of tolerance. And so the dysregulation, the emotional dysregulation, is in the hyper or hypo-arousal. And so this is how a trauma can affect our window of tolerance. And so we have those, in a fight response, we will attack, confront, and dominate. So the emotion can be anger, irritability, and the outcome can be insult, blame, and mistreatment. And, with our flight response, we're going to run. We're going to quit. And, the freeze response, we implode, we freeze. And when we face something, we challenge. And there's engagement. And so, when we have the fight or flight response, we've got that energy available to us. We're highly energised to act to save our own life, to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves, or to challenge or confront the enemy that's causing the danger. And in the freeze response, we just shrink and want to disappear and become invisible. And that's often what little kids will do when they're frightened, when their needs aren't being met, when they have a trauma. They just try and completely become invisible and little and disappear and stop breathing, and they repress all their needs. And this is why children are just so vulnerable to trauma. And so in addiction, addiction can be so subtle, really so subtle. You know, this is what Baba can, when we go into when we really explore what Maya is, and the very subtle effects of Maya. And you know, Baba says, you know, the stronger we become in our spiritual life, then the more cunning and tricky Maya becomes, because it's Maya that keeps coming in our Brahman life to make us strong. And you know, I've been working on myself actively in my Brahman life for almost 40 years. And my experience is that Maya as I get stronger and stronger, Maya does get stronger and stronger, because the waves break higher. You know, to make me, I have to rise to the occasion every time Maya comes. And, you know, what might have bothered me 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, it's not going to bother me now. What's going to happen now is going to be different. It's going to be at a much more refined, royal level. And Baba warns us about this. And our addictions will play out. One of the things I've noticed in my therapy practice, because by now, you know, I've seen thousands of clients over the last 30-odd years. I've worked with thousands of people. I've worked in large institutions like prisons, rehabilitating criminals. I've worked in detoxes and rehabs. And I've worked with large groups of men. I've worked with large groups of women. I've worked with babies and little children of addicted mums. And I have seen the effect of the addiction in a parent on a baby that's just a few months old. It is heartbreaking, let me tell you. Utterly, utterly heartbreaking. And, you know, my first job as a rookie counsellor, I worked in a very progressive unit in Sydney where they developed a feminist program. There were only women working there. And we had a very visionary, enlightened board running that unit. And our coordinator was very spiritual, very enlightened. And she, you know, that was my career change. She said, I want you to come and work here with me. And I want you to change this place. I had no idea what she was talking about. She said, you come in and you teach everyone here to meditate. Everyone. All of the staff, all of the clients. And we were a teaching unit because we were so progressive. We had psychologists and psychiatrists from all over the world coming to learn from the program we were running. And I had to teach them all to meditate. And I tell you, that place was just lifted up because addicts are natural meditators. Because they're so used to altering their mind. They're not afraid of meditation. They just get into their feelings. And that place was humming. The vibration in that place just... And we could all see the difference in the clients. They were so excited about their recovery. And they used to say, I have now found the best drug ever. and it's not going to hurt me, and it's free. And we would watch the change in them during the time they spent in the unit. We ran a 6-week program, and often they'd say, I want to stay for another 6 weeks, and if we could, we'd keep them. Or then they'd reapply after a while and we'd take them back in for another 6 weeks. And many of them were mothers. They could bring their children from 0 to 8. And we would put the babies in a little office, in a little room opposite the staff office. We had some cots in there so that the staff could keep an eye on the babies while the mums were doing group. They did group work morning and afternoon. And so we'd keep an eye on these babies. And I learned so much from those babies. So, just a few months old, some of them. And I remember this little baby. We had a new baby in, new mum, and she was in group all morning, and I thought, I better go in and check on the babies. And we hadn't been in for a couple of hours because they were asleep. And I went in, and this baby was wide awake. It needed its nappy changed, like seriously. And this tiny little thing, when I opened the door and walked in, none of those babies had made a sound. And she pulled herself up. She was only, 5, 6 months old. She pulled herself up the side of the cot and gave me this big smile and held her arms out to me like I was her mum. And she didn't know me. She had not seen me before. And the look in her eyes, she had direct eye contact with me. She held her arms out to me, and her eyes were telling me, I just want to attach to you because you're warm. And you're here. And I noticed the effect. What I was feeling inside myself was terror. It was terror and heartbreak for that tiny little being. Because it was obvious how neglected that baby was. That her mother was using drugs and was not responding to her crying, or she'd learned to stifle her cries and her own needs. And there's an addict in the making. And so I learned so much from working with babies. I just learned it intuitively. I could tell you that life story of the mother and the baby after an hour with a baby. We all could. It was just intuitive. And so what we all want is these chemicals that make us happy, make our brain happy. Serotonin, dopamine, the endorphins and the oxytocins. Oxytocin is called the love hormone. And if any of you have got kids, when a mother's in labour, she gets an absolute rush of oxytocin, and so does the baby. And so when the baby comes out of the womb and is delivered, mother and baby have got this massive rush of oxytocin. They fall in love. And this is why, it's so utterly devastating. It is a primal wound when a baby is removed from its mother at birth or soon after birth. That is a wound no one will recover from. And there was a time when the Catholic Church was removing babies from young unwed mothers in Australia, and probably it happened all around the world. I don't know. I know it happens in India. But these babies being removed, they can't recover from that because that baby has been in the womb for all these months, and his mother and child become so energetically and vibrationally attuned. And the karma is intense. And so the devastation, no one can recover from that. And so these are the things that will set us right up for addiction in later life. And that can't be put into words. We won't know it. We feel it, but we cannot know it cognitively. And so the need... Sorry? Yes. Yes. Yep. I mean, you know, I have grown up in a very patriarchal society. Please.
We have the mic.
Yeah, that would be good.
If you raise your hands or stand up, I can give you the mic.
Let that fellow ask the question over the mic, please, so it gets recorded.
Thanks. This is not question. This is correct. Yes, this is not commentary. I say I'm correct understanding you, sister.
Okay, so it's a comment.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yes. Now, a baby is born with a need to attach to the person whose womb it has been in, and that is its mother, its biological mum. We all have a need to attach to a mother figure. Now, if the child is taken away from the mother and a warm, loving, responsive caregiver takes the place of that biological mother, there can be a lot of repair for the baby. But we do need that attachment figure in the first 2 years. If the baby doesn't get a warm, loving, soft, responsive caregiver who can meet all of its needs. And babies are completely dependent. They can't do anything for themselves. So that figure, if that figure is there, that baby, that repair can happen. A lot of that repair can happen. There'll still be that deep void of separation from the mother, but a lot of repair can happen, spiritually, emotionally and psychologically. And I also just want to be very mindful here that we have all grown up in mother-blaming societies. We have all grown up in the patriarchy. And it is the patriarchy that blames mothers for everything. And this is one thing that the feminist movement has really, really focused on, is to stop blaming mothers for everything that is wrong with us. Because we live in we've all grown up in a patriarchal context where women are not regarded the same as men in an equal way, in East and West and everything in between. And so this has been what the second wave feminism, which came from America, started in 1960, has tried to address. And as a young rookie counsellor, I started in the very early 90s, and I was trained. By now, everyone in Australia is practicing feminist therapy. And so that is my background, that is my training. And so I'm just letting you know that I come from this basic position. And in understanding what goes on spiritually in addiction, we understand that we all have, just as we have physical organs, our heart, our liver, our kidneys, our stomach, our brain, etc. So the soul has spiritual organs, and the body is a mirror of the organs of the soul. We have a conscience. Our spiritual organs are the mind, the intellect, the conscience. Our awareness is a spiritual organ. Our will, our memory. By the way, if any of you in your country get The Soul Illuminated, it's a book I wrote. It was published in 2003. Obviously, it's written in the English language. But it's been selling ever since, not only in the Brahma Kumaris, but in the English-speaking world. It's been selling ever since. And so when we have a thought, you know, the mind creates thought. That's all it, you know, that's what the mind does. The cognitive mind creates thought 24 hours a day. And that thought then goes to the intellect, which analyses the thought. And it then goes, I can't read this. Yeah, it goes to the intellect and the conscience. And it gets processed. That thought gets processed by the intellect and the conscience. It then goes to the will. And what the will does, it produces the energy to put that thought into action. And depending on the process of what the intellect and the conscience have come up with in their analysis, that thought will either get put into action or not get put into action. And after that action or non-action, I've got a little feedback loop in there which will tell me if I've just helped, if I was on my way to work and I was late and I was in a big hurry and I'm in the city trying to get to work in heavy traffic, and an old person asks me to help them cross the road, and I have to stop when I'm trying to get to work, and I say, okay, I will help you cross the road, and I help them cross the road. I take the time when I'm running late, and they're so grateful when we get to the other side of the road. They're so grateful. They look at me with such gratitude, and I just get this responsive feedback. I did the right thing. So what if I made me late? You know, I did the right thing. And so I feel good. And so I get a good feeling from that. And then, so this is how the spiritual organs work under normal conditions. Now, when I have an addiction, there's a short-circuiting of the process. And it's like the intellect and the conscience and the awareness get cut out of the circuit. Because my intellect, my conscience, and my awareness are my moral compass. And in addiction, that thought, and even before the thought occurs, there will be an action straight from the will. And so my higher functioning, which is my intellect, my conscience, and my awareness, it's cut out. And this is what happens in addiction. Oh, I can't be seen, apparently.
What did you say? Sorry? Yeah, this is very, they cannot read this font.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, neither can I. From here.
You can just take a photograph and then make it below it.
Yeah, so what we're seeing at the bottom half of the picture where you've got that you've got the darker line, we've got the action going straight from the mind over to the will. So all of what's above that, which is our intellect, our conscience and our awareness, are bypassed. And that's what happens in addiction. So I have lost my higher functioning. I have lost my moral compass. And this is when I will transgress my own moral and spiritual values. And this is why so much shame and guilt and negative feeling comes from addiction. You know, and the feedback, every time I act out addictively, that feedback loop is going to say to me, you're terrible, you shouldn't have done that, you're weak, you're hopeless, you're a lousy person, you just, you know, you'll just never beat this, you're going nowhere. And it's so self-defeating, you know, and this is why addiction is so isolating. It's like, I don't want other people to see this terrible person that I really am. And so I pull away from people because I don't want to be judged and criticised. I don't want to be rejected and abandoned, but what I'm doing in the process is rejecting myself. I'm abandoning myself. And I experience deep loneliness, a deep sense of loneliness, abandonment and rejection because I'm doing it to myself. And so it's really hard for me to reach out across that and ask for help. And over time, that addiction I'll dig in deeper and deeper and deeper in the darkness and the isolation. I get more isolated. I get more cut off from the people around me. And I hide. It's like I just go into hiding, and shame and guilt becomes overwhelming. And then one day, you know, and what's the only thing that makes me feel better is I have more of that addiction. Whatever it is that I'm using to push those bad feelings down, I use more, I need more and more of. And then one day that stops working. And I've dug myself so deeply into that hole, I can't see out. I can no longer reach out of that hole. I can't see daylight anymore. I am lost in the dark. In the darkness of that spiritual void inside. And that is the loneliest, saddest, most tragic place. And when this is the point, this is the vital turning point, what we call it a rock bottom for people in addiction. And it is at that point when the drug user will take an overdose and kill themselves. It can also be the point at which that person will scream out for help. And they will reach out, they'll go online and find a helpline, and they will call that helpline and say, please help me. I can't help myself. Because the pain of what they're doing is worse than the pain of not doing it. And that is a real predicament. And frankly, the only person who can really help me at that point is God. And that is when the atheist will turn to God. That is when the addict in the deepest denial will stop rationalising and justifying and defending what they're doing. And they will reach out and say, help me. And they will reach out, hopefully, to a helpline. Sometimes it's to their local doctor or it's to their local minister.
शिव पिता को अब याद करो, मुक्ति धाम तुम्हें जाना है। अपने सुकर्मों के बल पर ही सतयुग में तुमको आना है। शिव पिता को अब याद करो। स्वर्णिम युग है, शिव पिता फिर से आया है। ब्रह्मामुख से शिव बाबा ने वही गीता ज्ञान सुनाया है। कलयुग का अंत अब आया है, विकराल विनाश खड़ा आगे। पिता को अब याद करो। पांडव शिव शक्ति सेना की रणभेरी अब फिर बजती है। सतयुग में तुमको आना है। शिव पिता को अब याद करो, मुक्ति धाम तुम्हें जाना है। अपने सुकर्मों के बल पर ही सतयुग में अब तुम्हें आना है। सतयुग में अब तुम्हें आना है। धाम में तुम्हें गाना है।
Oh. And so we would say recovery from addiction is the ability to tolerate our own feelings. And, you know, one of the hot potatoes in Brahmin life, for many people, I'm not saying it's you, but for many people, can be celibacy, can arise with celibacy. You know, there can be a lot of things that get opened up around this whole issue of purity. Because when we become pure, a lot of sanskars we didn't know were there, spiritual voids that we didn't know were there, will get opened up. And they'll start, because when we meditate, the reality is, and the more we meditate, the more this will happen, that everything we've repressed from the beginning of this birth will come up to the surface. And this is why in Brahman life, or on any spiritual path, we are very vulnerable to addictions, subtle addictions. Because when those spiritual voids come up, the way ego works is it wants to push them down again. And so celibacy can be a real hot potato, and it's deeply problematic because in the Brahma Kumaris there's this terribly Catholic, religious attitude that we can't talk about this. It's like a taboo subject. And actually it needs to be on the table. And I know that Sister Suman has asked me if there's interest that, and people want to get into a small group later on this afternoon, that there will be a group for brothers and a separate group for sisters. If any of you are interested, in which we can just sit in the training centre in a small, in a circle and have an intimate discussion about celibacy and the issues around that, if there is the interest. And I think it's a very worthwhile subject to discuss because celibacy can bring up so many other issues for us. Because the ego, the way the ego works, and we all have an ego, nobody comes to Brahman life without ego. We have had 63 iron-aged births, and we have been increasingly developing our ego throughout those 63 births. And because this Brahman birth is our final birth, more than likely, in the Iron Age, our ego is at its most intense. And the way ego works, and it is a defence mechanism. It is fear-based. We develop ego very subtly over our 63 births as protection from feeling uncomfortable emotions. And that's all ego is. And so the way it works is when I've got an uncomfortable feeling or emotion coming up at the subconscious level, so it's below consciousness, the ego knows, and it will try and distract me. And it will say, before that feeling actually becomes conscious, I might get an urge to go and do a huge amount of exercise, or to eat some chocolate, which I can't stop eating, or, to do something else. It can be anything. I get on the internet, every time we scroll, I get another hit of dopamine. Makes me feel good. Little hit. Makes me feel great. This is why the biggest, most fastest growing addiction now with kids, as well as adults, is the internet. And scrolling through these sites and social media, and, it has opened a minefield. People binging on Netflix and Prime, and the movie streaming channels. It's huge. And it's to get that hit, that dopamine hit. Gives me that little feel good, and it's unconscious. And I might think, I should stop this, but I can't. I just want to keep doing, just another hour. Another 5 minutes turns into another 2 hours, and I should have gone to bed. I've got a very dear friend, 10 years younger than me, who is addicted to killing gorgons. and playing these games on the internet. Totally addicted. And a very spiritual person. She's not a Brahmin. She has Baba's knowledge, but she's not a Brahmin. And she just, can't stop killing gorgons. She's been doing it for at least the decade I've known her, decade or more that I've known her. And, she will go to bed at night and spend hours killing gorgon. It's, it totally is an addiction. And what makes an addiction, we all have habits. But the difference between a habit and an addiction is that I can have the realisation that this habit is not doing me any good. And I'll say, okay, I'm not going to do it, and I stop. I stop and I don't think about it anymore. I've broken the habit. But if I have the thought, this is not doing me any good, I'm going to stop, and I keep doing it because I can't stop, then it's an addiction. And there are lots. The internet has opened up a minefield of other addictions. It's not just scrolling through sites, but there are sites, there are experts working, designing these sites to hook as many people as they possibly can. It's like, food you buy now that's processed got so much sugar and salt and stuff to get you addicted to it. And the internet, there's so much going on on the internet. All of these conspiracy theories that just, COVID, it all started during COVID. And now people who didn't want to get vaccinated during COVID are completely mind-controlled with all of these conspiracy theories. A friend of mine who's totally mind-controlled by this addiction, a lot of Brahmins are, believe me. Maybe you're one of them. But one of them in Australia said to me, he's realised that the earth is flat. The men didn't land on the moon, and it's like there's this whole mind control thing going on the internet to make what's real not real and what's not real real. And it's a complete turnaround. And it's total mind control of people who were sensible, caring, loving, humanist Brahmins, and I've seen this so much in the Brahmin family, have become fascist and adopted completely anti-human fascist values. They no longer believe in climate change. They no longer believe in all the things that are in our face because they are so programmed and mind-controlled on the internet. And this all began 4 years ago when we started going into lockdown. That was the beginning of it. But anyway, as I say, I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the Brahmin family over time. I haven't, I've told Charlie about it. I talk to people about it. But in the mental health field, we are getting concerned because it is, I'd say, a new, huge, looming mental health issue. And it's so big because people's belief in all this stuff, because they go on the internet and they think if they get it off the internet, it's the truth. So they think it's uncritical. They take it in uncritically. And I'm a trained critical thinker. I'm a social scientist. I've studied the psychology. I've studied the psychotherapy now for a very long time, for well over 30 years. And I am a trained critical thinker. And I am very careful about what I believe. that was why it was actually very difficult for me to become a Brahmin. And it was only Baba interacting with me in a very direct way that broke down my atheism and broke down my critical thinking enough and got into my heart in a way that I accepted at a heart level. And so I just want to say we have to be very careful of the internet these days. The less time I spend on the internet, the better. I don't actually like it. I don't do no social media. I think it's incredibly dangerous and troublesome. And I use the internet to research and, to do a lot of my professional development, because it's all online now, mostly. And I limit what I do on the internet. And I'm very careful about the media that I read. Very, very careful indeed. Because, it's the world of lies now. And Maya will come through these outlets and attack us. And I think, as Brahmins, we really have to exercise the power to discriminate and the power to judge. Because, this stuff, in time, will have an effect on what we're doing spiritually. I'm kind of watching this happen to my friends, and I'll confront it directly in Australia. I'm trained. I'm a human rights trained activist, therapeutic activist. And my training is when people are spruiking rubbish, whether it's racism or some fear-based nonsense, I will challenge. I will confront that thinking. I am trained to do it. I will challenge it, and I challenge it amongst my friends in Australia, and so they will stop. They will then become very selective in what they say to me because they don't want to be challenged. And so, Maya is coming in more and more subtle ways out there, and so we do have to be very, very careful, I believe, as Brahmins, as anybody, what we take in. Just be very, very perspicacious. And so what the recovery journey brings me to is that nirvana, that place of no wind. Nirvana means a place of no wind, no opposition, no uncomfortability. And so meditation and silence. I do a great deal of extended silence retreats in my Brahmin life. I've just been at ORC doing the 4-dayer down there. Before I left Australia, I'd done a 10-day silence retreat. There's no speaking, no music, no eye contact, no journaling, no writing, no listening to music, no listening to anything. We have a surrender ceremony at the beginning. We all hand in our phones and whatever technology we've got with us. Do I have to stop? And we hand those in so that we have no diversion, and we sit in meditation 8 to 10 hours a day together in noble silence. And I've been doing this for 26 years, running these extended silence retreats. And what the accumulation of that power of silence has given me is a very deep clarity. And so I believe very little of what comes to me from out there. I'm very, very careful about it. Because, there's a grain of truth in all this conspiracy theory, which makes it very palatable. So, do any of you have questions?
Anybody has any questions? Translate.
All right. Om Shanti. We have some questions from Russian groups. Have you some topics of meditation for beginning to disposal addiction? Can you share with us?
I think I've been doing that for the last almost 2 hours.
2 hours?
You know, if I may suggest, if you can, you obviously speak English. Do you read English?
A little bit.
If you can get hold of a copy.
Raisa can translate.
Oh. If you can get hold of a copy of my first book, it's called The Soul Illuminated. I write at great length on addiction. And then there's several chapters on it. There's another chapter called Filling the Spiritual Void. And early in my Brahmin life, I developed a method of using meditation to fill those spiritual voids. And I write about it in detail in The Soul Illuminated. It works. It really, really works. And I think we're getting a little bit short of time now, but maybe later on today, if anyone wants to come and talk in a smaller group in the training centre about celibacy, I can go into that with you. I can teach you that directly, that method.
Okay. And one question also, forbidden for teenager use internet. It's right or it's not good position of parents? Forbidden for teenager used internet.
For teenagers using the internet, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well,
Yeah, forbidden.
To forbid them from using the internet.
Oh, I wouldn't forbid a teenager from using. I wouldn't forbid a child from using the internet. If you don't have a computer in the house, they will still want to use the internet because their peer groups are all using it and talking about it. So, but I think if your children, if you have a very good open communication type of relationship with your kids, and they will talk to you about stuff. It's really important for kids to feel they can talk to you about anything. And when they're teenagers, they will start to develop some inhibitions around this. It's just part of being a teenager. And of course they want to rebel to some extent. I think forbidding something is not a good idea. But to have very clear, solid boundaries around their use of the internet is important. That they don't get too much screen time because they need to go out and they need to be active. They need to play sport or be out, you know, swimming, going to the beach, playing football, playing sport, out with their friends, doing things with their body, which is so good for the mind and so good for their brain development. You know, our brain doesn't stop developing till we're nearly 30. And physical exercise is really important. You know, some people get the idea when they become a Brahmin, they shouldn't do any more exercise. I don't know where they got that idea, because Brahma Baba had lots of exercise. He took everybody, all the, you know, in the early days, they went on walks, they climbed mountains. You know, they played games outside. They went on picnics and played cricket. They had a lot of exercise. Brahma Baba in the early days dealt with a lot of trauma, he and Mama, because of the domestic violence. that the sisters had experienced. He says in the Sakarmurlis all the time, I have to open an asylum. He had to take those people in and look after them. He and Mama became, I'd say, very adept at dealing with trauma. So, you know, we need physical exercise. We need plenty of it. We need to look after our bodies. We need to eat good food. And all of this, we're balanced, and kids need this, and they need to be encouraged to learn this as balanced, healthy lifestyles. Not too much internet. But no, not forbidding it, no. Yeah.
Should we stop there? Be okay?
Okay.
Okay, so first let us give a round of applause to our very special guest today. And you know, the opinions expressed by our speakers are not necessarily that of the Brahma Kumaris, but still we welcome whatever is said. So for this afternoon, does anyone want to meet? We could say 4:30 to 5:30 in training room 1. And I'm wondering whether the Russians would like to take up that spot. 4:30 to 5:30 this afternoon. Would the Russians like to take up that spot and meet her?